In 2014, a photographer named Melanie Wilhide had her laptop stolen right out of her home. On it were thousands of personal photos, years of work, memories, moments she assumed were simply gone the second the thief wiped the drive clean. Months later, police actually got the laptop back. They pulled over a car and there it was, sitting in the back seat. But the thief had wiped it, formatted it, used it as his own for months. As far as anyone could tell, Melanie's photos were dead, except they weren't. When forensic experts examined the drive, they found something strange. Fragments of Melanie's original photos were still there, sitting in the space the computer had labeled empty, partially overwritten by whatever the thief had done with the laptop in the meantime. The results were bizarre, corrupted, glitched. Her own face and old apartments bleeding into strangers' files, half-formed, half-erased. It was so strange, so accidentally beautiful that Melanie put the images in a gallery show. She named it after the man who unknowingly created them. And that's the moment worth sitting with, because it breaks something you probably believe without ever questioning it, that delete means gone. It doesn't. Not immediately. Maybe not for a long time. Here's the real question this video exists to answer. When you press delete on a photo, on your phone, right now, today, where does it actually go? Not metaphorically, physically. And more importantly, at what exact point does it become truly permanently, unrecoverably gone? Some deleted photos die in seconds. Others survive for years, fully intact, hiding in plain sight on a phone that's been sold, reset, and handed to a stranger. The gap between those two outcomes comes down to a handful of systems almost nobody has ever heard of. File systems, encryption keys, memory chips that physically cannot forget on command. So if deleting a file doesn't erase it, what does your phone actually do the instant you tap that trash icon? That's where we start. Here's the first thing almost nobody knows. When you delete a photo from your phone, in most cases, it doesn't delete anything at all. Not yet, Apple Photos and Google Photos both quietly intercept the delete command and reroute it. Instead of destroying the file, they move it into a hidden holding folder, something you've probably seen and ignored 100 times. Recently deleted. It sits there patiently for about 30 days. During that entire month, the original photo is still sitting on your device. Full resolution, full metadata, completely untouched. It's not damaged, it's not partial, it's not kind of there. It's just hidden from the folder you normally look in. And here's the part that gets stranger, even after you empty that folder yourself. Even after you get the little warning that says this cannot be undone. That doesn't necessarily mean every copy everywhere disappears in that instant. If you've got an iPad or a second phone signed into the same account, and it happened to be off or offline or just hadn't synced yet, it can be sitting there completely unaware that anything was ever deleted. It's still holding onto the original file, waiting to reconnect to a network that will eventually tell it the photo is gone. This whole staging system, the 30-day folder, the delayed sync, exists for one reason: to protect you from yourself, from the accidental delete, from the panicked wait, no, undo that moment we've all had. But it also means something uncomfortable. For most people, for most photos, dated doesn't mean deleted, it means scheduled. So once that folder is finally, truly emptied, what happens to the actual data sitting on the physical chip inside your phone? This is where it gets genuinely strange, because even after the staging folder is emptied, your phone still doesn't erase the photo. What it does instead is remove the pointer to it. Think of your phone's storage like a book. Every photo is a chapter, sitting on actual pages, physically printed in ink. The operating system doesn't read the book page by page to find your photo. It flips to the table of contents at the front, finds the listing for Chapter 47, Beach Trip, June 2023, and rips that single line out. The chapter itself, the actual pages, the actual photo data, is left completely intact, sitting in the book exactly where it always was. But as far as anyone flipping through the table of contents is concerned, that chapter simply doesn't exist anymore. On an iPhone, this happens inside a structure with a name straight out of a computer science textbook, a Space Manager B tree. On a lot of Android phones, it happens through tables called the NAT and the SciT. Different names, same trick. The address is deleted, not the content. The space your photo used to occupy gets relabeled available. That's it. Available for something else to be written there eventually. Not now. Just eventually. This is exactly why cheap, off-the-shelf recovery software has been able to resurrect deleted photos for years. The picture was never gone. It was just missing from the index. And this isn't a bug. It isn't corporate laziness. Engineers built it this way on purpose, and the reason has nothing to do with privacy, or protecting your data, or anything sentimental at all. It's about protecting the hardware from destroying itself. Here's something your phone's manual will never tell you. The flash memory chip inside it is dying, a little, every single time it gets erased and rewritten. And it can only take so many of those cycles before it physically fails. Unlike an old-fashioned hard drive, which could nudge a single magnetic bit back and forth as many times as you wanted, flash memory works completely differently. It can't overwrite one tiny piece of data by itself. It has to erase in giant chunks, blocks, typically somewhere between 2 and 8 megabytes at a time, before it can write anything new there. So imagine if your phone tried to physically erase a photo the instant you deleted it. Every single swipe to delete would burn through part of that chip's limited lifespan. Delete 100 blurry photos while cleaning out your camera roll, and you'd be quietly wearing down the exact same hardware that needs to survive years of daily use. There's also speed. Physically erasing flash memory is dramatically slower than simply reading or writing to it. If your phone insisted on doing a full physical erase the moment you tap delete, your screen would freeze. Every single time. So the engineers made a trade. The phone lies to you gently. It marks the space as free immediately, so your experience feels instant, and then it quietly defers the real physical destruction for later. For a moment when the phone is idle, charging, not being touched, that deferred cleanup has a name: garbage collection. It runs invisibly, usually overnight, usually while you're asleep, silently going back through all the space you thought you'd already cleared, and finally, physically clearing it for real. Which raises an obvious question. If the phone is the one deciding when this actually happens, who's really in charge of your data? Beneath your phone's operating system, below the apps, below the interface, below anything you'll ever directly see, there's a completely separate piece of hardware quietly making its own decisions about where your data physically lives. It's called the flash translation layer, and it's essentially a translator sitting between your operating system and the raw memory chip. The OS thinks in terms of files and folders. The chip only understands raw physical addresses. This layer bridges the two, and critically, it doesn't automatically know when you've deleted something. Your phone has to explicitly tell it. It sends a signal, depending on the device, it's called trim, discac, or yunmap, that essentially says, this space is free now, you can clean it up whenever. Until that signal is sent and acted on, the chip's controller has no idea a photo was deleted. Which means, during its routine background maintenance, it might keep copying that dyned photos data around the chip like it's still perfectly valid information. This constant shuffling has a name too: wear leveling. The chip physically relocates fragments of your files across different memory cells over and over, specifically so that no single section of the chip wears out faster than the rest. It's protecting the hardware's lifespan, and in the process, it's scattering pieces of your supposedly deleted photo across the chip like breadcrumbs. On phones specifically, these deletion signals aren't sent instantly. They're batched and dispatched later, usually only when the device is idle, fully charged, and plugged into power. Which means a photo you deleted at 8 a.m. could still be sitting there, completely intact, at 6 p.m. that evening, hours after you were absolutely certain it was gone. So if the data's still physically sitting there for that long, why can't anyone just walk in and pull it back out? For a long time they could, and some people did, on a scale most users never imagine. Old, unencrypted drives, the kind that predate modern smartphone security, have ended up getting shipped overseas as donations once they're considered obsolete. A huge number of them ended up in massive electronic waste sites, most infamously in a city in Ghana that's become known, informally, as one of the world's largest digital dumping grounds. It's simply cheaper. Sending outdated electronics abroad, labeled as charitable donations, costs less than properly, securely destroying them at home. And in those dump sites, groups working the scrap have pulled functioning drives out of the piles and searched through them for anything of value. Investigations into some of these sites turned up recovered material connected to sensitive government contractors, defense agencies, homeland security work, sitting on drives that were assumed to be permanently, safely dead. None of that required cracking any encryption. It didn't require sophisticated hacking tools or state-level resources. It only required an unencrypted drive, patience, and someone willing to dig through what everyone else assumed was garbage. That vulnerability, the fact that tight data on old unencrypted storage is basically just hidden, not destroyed, is exactly what pushed the entire tech industry to abandon this approach completely over the last decade. Which brings us to the single biggest shift in the entire story of digital deletion. The one that changed everything. Here's the twist almost nobody expects. On a modern smartphone, the actual photo data barely matters anymore. What matters is a tiny, invisible piece of math you will never see. Every single photo on an iPhone gets its own individual encryption key, a random 256-bit code generated specifically for that one file, and no other. That key doesn't live out in the open. It's locked away inside a dedicated piece of hardware called the Secure Enclave, a chip that's physically separate from the rest of the phone's processor, built specifically to guard cryptographic secrets. Android runs an equivalent system, splitting storage into keys tied to your lock screen and keys tied purely to the hardware itself. Here's why this changes everything. When you permanently delete a photo now, the phone doesn't actually need to touch the massive block of image data sitting on the flash chip at all. It only needs to destroy one tiny individual key. And once that key is gone, the leftover data on the chip becomes mathematically meaningless. Not hard to read. Not encrypted, but crackable with enough effort. Genuinely useless. If an investigator physically removed the memory chip and read every single transistor directly, all they'd find is statistical noise, indistinguishable from complete randomness. This one design decision is precisely why the old style of recovery, the kind that saved Melanie Wilhide's half-corrupted photos off that stolen laptop, has become almost obsolete on modern encrypted phones, which makes the next story genuinely bizarre. Because in 2024, deleted photos came back anyway. In May of 2024, Apple released a routine software update, iOS 17.5. Within days, people all over the world started posting the same unsettling story. Old photos, some of them deleted years earlier, were suddenly reappearing in their camera rolls. Photos they hadn't seen in years. Photos they were certain they'd destroyed. Security researchers dug into the update and traced the cause to a repair routine buried deep inside Apple's photo library software, a tool designed to scan for and fix corrupted photo databases. The real story went back much further. Years earlier, a software glitch on some devices had deleted a photo's entry from the visible photo database, but had failed to send the actual underlying command that tells the file system to release the file itself. The database thought the photo was gone. The file system never got the message, so the raw image file just sat there, fully intact, completely unindexed, invisible in the gallery but physically present on the device the entire time, sometimes carried forward across multiple phone upgrades. Preserved by backups and device transfers nobody thought twice about. When iOS 17.5 ran its new repair scan, it found these unindexed files sitting on the file system and did exactly what it was designed to do. It assumed they'd been accidentally lost, and it quietly restored them to the visible gallery. Apple pulled the feature within days, in an emergency patch 17.5.1, and in doing so, they confirmed something important. These weren't secretly stored on Apple's servers. They'd been hiding in plain sight, on the user's own devices the entire time, which raises an uncomfortable question of its own. If a photo itself can be fully gone and the surrounding evidence can still bring it back, what do professional investigators actually look for? This is the part almost nobody thinks about, because even after the original photo and its encryption key are both destroyed, your phone often keeps a tiny second copy hiding somewhere else entirely. It's called a thumbnail, a small, low-resolution preview image, generated automatically so your gallery can scroll smoothly without loading full-size photos every time. And critically, deleting the original high-resolution image does not reliably delete this thumbnail. This is exactly the kind of evidence that professional forensic tools, the kind used by law enforcement, made by companies like Cellebrite and Magnet Forensics, are specifically built to find, not the original file. The leftovers Nathraprata is another goldmine. Timestamps, GPS coordinates, camera settings, all of it frequently lives in separate database logs that exist completely independently of the photo file itself. Delete the photo, and the log entry describing exactly when and where it was taken can still be sitting there. Modern phones also run constant background AI analysis, scanning your photos to recognize faces, objects, and locations so you can search for them later. That process builds its own hidden index, completely separate from your actual photo library. Forensic investigators can pull that index and prove a photo existed, where it was taken, who was in it, long after the image itself is gone. None of this requires breaking any encryption. It just requires knowing where phones tend to leave their spare copies lying around. And that thought alone should make you a little uneasy, because if a blurry thumbnail can survive a full deletion, how many other secret copies of that same photo are floating around right now, on other devices, in other apps, that you've never even considered? A single photo you took once on one afternoon can simultaneously exist in 5 or 6 completely separate places, and deleting it from your gallery does nothing to most of them. Your phone's storage, your cloud backup, whatever messaging app you sent it through, whatever social platform you posted it to. A synced tablet sitting in a drawer. Each one of those is its own independent copy, governed by its own independent rules. Apps like WhatsApp, Telegram, and Signal each save downloaded images into their own private, isolated storage, folders that your phone's main gallery delete button has no authority over whatsoever. Editing a photo often makes things worse in a way people rarely notice. Instead of replacing the original, most apps quietly create an entirely new file, doubling the number of copies that now exist of essentially the same image. Most people treat delete as a single action. In reality, it's one command fired at one app out of potentially 5 or 6 completely separate storage systems, each of which needs its own individual delete command to actually catch up. So even if you tracked down and deleted every single visible copy, the phone, the messaging apps, the social post, there's still one version left that you don't personally control at all. Who decides when that last copy, sitting somewhere in a data center you'll never see, finally disappears? Here's something that sounds almost like a contradiction. The safest place to store your photos is also the hardest place to truly delete them from. Cloud providers don't just save your photo as one neat file on one server. They break it into fragments and scatter those fragments across multiple physical data centers, sometimes on different continents, specifically so that no single hardware failure can ever wipe out your data. Deleting a photo from the cloud means sending a deletion signal to every single node holding a piece of it. Providers track this using something called a tombstone record, a marker that says, "This is gone," and network delays can occasionally cause a deleted photo to briefly reappear on a device reconnecting late, simply because it didn't get the tombstone message in time. Then there are backup snapshots, automated, scheduled copies taken purely for disaster recovery. When you permanently delete a photo, it can still exist untouched inside one of these read-only backup snapshots for anywhere from 30 to 90 days after you deleted it. And in enterprise or legal contexts, there's something even stranger: a legal hold. If an account becomes relevant to litigation, deletion can be silently, automatically blocked altogether, overriding whatever the user actually requested. The same redundancy that protects your memories from a cracked screen or a dead phone is exactly what makes truly instantly, permanently deleting something from the cloud almost impossible. So when every visible copy and every hidden copy is finally, actually gone, is that really the end? Or is there one more step even beyond that? Chapter 12. The government standard for making data actually disappear there is in fact an official answer to that question, and it comes from an unlikely source: the US government. The National Institute of Standards and Technology publishes a framework called SP 888, and it defines exactly 3 tiers of real data destruction. The lowest tier is called clear, and it's basically what your phone already does by default. Space gets marked as free. Basic recovery tools can sometimes still defeat it, which is exactly the vulnerability that let old recovery methods work in the first place. The middle tier is called purge. This is where cryptographic erasure comes in, destroying the encryption key itself. The government's own standard treats this as mathematically equivalent to full physical destruction, because without that key, the leftover data is genuinely, provably unrecoverable. The highest tier is called destroy, physically shredding, incinerating, or chemically dissolving the storage chip itself. So there's no data left to recover by any method, ever, under any circumstances. The Department of Defense actually specifies exact physical requirements for this. Shredded storage particles have to measure no more than 5 square millimeters to be considered properly destroyed. And even that's been challenged. After U.S. Embassy staff shredded confidential documents during the 1979 seizure of the embassy in Tehran, local workers spent years, by hand, piecing the shredded strips back together, page by page. So if even physical shredding has, historically, been defeated by nothing more than patience and enough hands, what does gone forever actually mean for something as small and as ordinary as a single photo? Here's the answer to the question we open this entire video with. A deleted photo never travels anywhere. It never goes to some secret folder, some hidden vault, some digital afterlife. It stays exactly where it physically was the entire time. And it simply becomes harder and harder to reach as different systems, one by one, finally catch up. True, complete, permanent erasure only happens once 3 separate things have all occurred. The physical space has actually been overwritten by new data, the encryption key protecting it has been destroyed, and every single backup snapshot holding a copy has expired. Depending on the device, depending on the service, depending on sheer luck, that entire process might finish in a matter of seconds. Or, as we saw with the iOS 17.5 incident, it might resurface years later, without warning, when nobody expects it. The single biggest misconception people carry around is treating delete as one clean, instant action, when in reality it's dozens of independent systems, on different timelines, each quietly making its own separate decision about when to finally let go. And there's something almost ironic buried in all of this. Phones are engineered this way specifically to protect you, to give you a safety net against the accidental delete, the panicked mistake, the moment of regret. That exact same protective design is precisely what makes true, complete deletion so difficult to achieve on purpose. So here's the real answer. A deleted photo doesn't go anywhere at first. It just becomes progressively harder to reach, until every pointer is gone, every key is destroyed, and every backup has finally run out. Which leaves one last thought worth sitting with the next time your thumb hovers over that trash icon. Are you actually erasing that photo, or are you just starting the clock?